Hi, and welcome to Dark Societies tonight.
Woo! Yeah!
So, for those that actually don't know who I am, I'm Lila. I organise the Post-Apocalyptic Book Club and these events. Thank you, first of all, to Waterstones Piccadilly for letting us take over tonight. And we are really excited and proud to present Pierce Brown tonight for his very first UK event for the Red Rising.
Be very gentle with me.
No.
Oh God.
It's going to be dramatic.
You were mean. I'm sorry.
I've got my own you guys. Behave.
We'll be good. We'll be good.
I'm not sure how many of you are writers, but there's such a temptation to put yourself as the main character. And I think that it's good to resist that overall because you're not that interesting. Like, I think that you should always inform yourself. Who you are as a person always informs your characters. I look at my characters as all my little lost children, basically fractured parts of my own soul. And then you take that little fractured part, the little tiny part, splinter, and then it expands, and then you create scope with it. I mean, the Jackal, for instance, is a character who's like a little sliver of my personality, but expanded and then complicated. Is this thing working?
Yes.
Okay, expanding, it's cracking. Expanding is complicated. And then with Darrow, it reflects my own journey because when I was younger, I moved around a bunch. I mean, I lived in 8 states. I went to 11 different schools. And obviously, anyone who's been to school can tell you that penetrating a clique at a new school is a very difficult thing. And as a boy, I had it a lot easier than my sister had it because I think there's more complications as a girl when you're like getting into a new school because all I had to be was good at sports and I was okay. But a girl could be too good at sports, she could be too pretty, she could be not pretty enough, she could be all these things. And so what I wanted to do is, I talked to my sister a lot when I was doing this story, and I thought, and I asked her about these moves through her eyes because I was immune to a lot of the things that she suffered, and I used her story and a lot of her words as to parallel Darrow's story as he's trying to infiltrate these social groups, as he's trying to break into a new society, particularly in Red Rising, when he feels ostracized. And in my entire life, I felt like the fly on the wall. And then I began to realize my sister felt like that even more so than me. And so it was fun throughout the course of this to actually learn more about her. Mars was interesting to me because it's our next evolutionary step, and what I wanted to do, and the reason I grounded the Red Rising trilogy within our conception of what the world is and what human beings can do in terms of our solar system. I didn't invent faster than light travel. There's no FTL drives. There's no warp speed, no light speed, nothing like that. Simply because I wanted it to be relatable and because I wanted it to be a commentary as well, and I wanted it to feel somewhat tethered to our reality. And so Mars was interesting to me, and I think it's been interesting to people like Kim Stanley Robinson, George R.R. Martin, and many illustrious sci-fi authors, because it is the next stage of evolution in terms of us moving to the next step. And what I want to see is how our next step goes wrong. What decision could we make in our next step? Not 7 steps down the road, but what's the next step we can make wrong? And that's the fun thing about science fiction, is getting to explore that. And if you do too many steps into the future, then you start losing that tether on reality, and it becomes a very different thing altogether. And it becomes like a Babylon 5, which I really like, but it's not the show, it's not the book I wanted to make. And I think by tethering to our reality, it becomes much more informed by mythology, much more informed by politics, and it's also much more relevant. So, but also Mars has a certain muscularity to it. And during the process, when I was selling this movie the book to Hollywood, every single producer asked me, "Can we make it Jupiter?" And then Jupiter 7 came out. They're like, "Can we make it Venus?" And the thing is, they were terrified. For a little while of John Carter of Mars. And I was like, "Oh no, it's fine, because I was trying to shop the movie when John Carter came out." And so we took time. So like, Mars Needs Moms is coming out soon. We'll be fine. They'll show that Mars isn't cursed. Then Mars Needs Moms comes out, and no one saw it. I mean, my mom saw it. Maybe that's it. And so the box office was so bad that they pulled all of the advertising. And so for like about a year, it was scorched earth. You couldn't touch Mars. And so I took that year to write my first draft of the screenplay. And then because of that, I was able to package it with Mark Forster, who did World War Z, Quantum of Solace, Finding Neverland, Monsters Ball. and find a guy who knows characters and can do scope with World War Z, but I wanted to find a director who knew characters and had the patience to see my writing, to see a first-time screenwriter take a crack at it. And then with him, we took it, and then we were able to escalate it a year after John Carter of Mars, a year after everyone said there's never going to be a Martian film, have a huge, and this is also Andy Weir's book was selling at the same time and doing very well, The Martian. And so then we had this like revival of Mars, and we were able to do a bidding war between Universal and Sony, and then went with Universal because of that. And then it's just a year later, so it shows you how hit or miss sometimes picking the right planet can be, which is a weird thing, because when I was writing it, I was like, well, obviously it's Mars. And then I realized, that everyone in Hollywood just wants you to change it to make it more palatable.
How challenging was it writing the screenplay after writing a novel?
Very.
What kind of differences?
Big ones.
Do you want to talk about it?
No. No, I will. It's essentially, imagine you have a cake, and then they say, now make it a cupcake. But make it still look pretty. It's a very difficult thing to do. And that's what making a book out of a movie is, especially when it's your cupcake, or I'm sorry, your cake, not my cupcake. I'm giving the cupcake to other people. So it's my cake. And it's a carrot cake because I like carrot cake. And now I'm just thinking about carrot cake. I don't have any. And I think that what you're essentially doing is you're tempted to just truncate the plot. You're tempted to just shrink it down. And the problem with doing that is that in a movie, there can only be two plots. There is the A plot, which is the one that you might be familiar with. It's like first act, second act, third act, midpoint, which is like point of no return. You have the inciting incident about 10 minutes in where something happens, where the droids land on Tatooine, and then, Beru and Uncle Owen are killed, and then Luke goes off on his adventure, right? And that's the end of Act 1. And then you get to the midpoint where they reach Alderaan, and that's the point of no return because it's destroyed. And then you start seeing the evolution of the plot, and so movies are very simple. Like, look at The Matrix. The Matrix is Neo discovering the Matrix, Neo training, seeing the Oracle, and then saving Morpheus. That is the movie. That is it. But it's huge, right? It opens up your imagination because of the power of visual medium. Yet it tricks you into thinking the story is much more complicated than it is. This is why people don't like adaptations, because you already know what the story is, or have problems with adaptations, But then you look at the ones that are done well. You look at Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and it's not because they did a truncated plot. It's not because they picked everything and made it a faithful adaptation. It's because they took the lifeblood I was talking about earlier, that soul, and they put it on screen, and they captured it. My favorite thing in Lord of the Rings is this sense of dying majesty. The idea that power and myth and magic is leaving Middle-earth with the elves. The elves' magic is giving up on mankind, basically. Or giving up on Middle-earth and saying, men, you can have it. And that is such a powerful feeling, and that was captured in the movie. And then there was hope from the lowest of forms, the hobbits. And that's the magic of Lord of the Rings for me. And they were able to capture that on the screen. And they changed so many different things. They left out Tom Bombadil, who's one of my favorite characters, and who looks at the ring and says, I don't need it. I mean, that's cool, right? But they left it out because it didn't serve the overall plot. And so, as I said, there are only two plots you can have in a movie. The A plot and the B plot can be dropped in slightly after the midpoint, and that's usually a minor or a secondary character development, which would be like Han's character development in A New Hope or something like that. And so that's the only sort of story you can tell. So the problem is taking characters who you love and then saying, how can you service the overall plot without becoming cardboard? And so overall, it's synthesizing without losing the majesty and also that soul.
It's all about the politics. I'm guessing, maybe from your background, did a little bit of research. That's something you really enjoy. How did that?
I don't know if I enjoy it. If you enjoy politics, something's wrong with you. If you're intrigued by I'm intrigued by fucked up things, like people and politics.
So how did your experiences within politics feed into books?
Well, so I worked on a campaign for 8 months, and I saw a very, very powerful, interesting, good man run through the grinder of war that is politics. So I was in part of the US Senate campaign where a man was trying to unseat the number 3 Democrat in the US Senate. So she was a very, very powerful Democrat, and he was trying to run against her. How much money ended up being spent in this campaign is insane. This is just in a state campaign, Washington State, for a U.S. Senate seat. Obviously, 100 senators, one seat, over $45 million were spent campaigning for it. 10 million by our camp, about 12 million by her camp, and then political action committees sending in, advertising money. So I got to see my candidate, who was a very, very good man. All he wanted to do was basically make deals in terms of how can we compromise in order to find a victory for all of us. And I saw him having to raise money all the time. I saw him having to do favors for people so that they would organize events for him or do fundraisers. And because otherwise he wouldn't win. So by the end you have, people think it's like 10 people you're indebted to. It's not, it's thousands. And they're all in coalitions, they're all linked together. And if you piss off Greg, the car dealer, who has 17 dealerships in your state, you might alienate his friend, the banker, who creates the loan packages for Greg, the car dealer. And then that is just a trickle-down effect, and then they could just choose another candidate and sabotage your election the next time through. So I witnessed that, and I saw who owns politicians, really. And it created this, this sense of disillusionment in me, and it just continued in Red Rising books.
Okay, so how did you, whilst sort of coming up with quite a complicated socio-political kind of environment in the trilogy, how did you sort of stop that from interfering too much with the narrative, if that makes sense? So did you feel like you had to have pages and pages of exposition explaining?
Well, I did, and then my editor just circles it and says, nope. And I said, they're thinking, like, remember I said, like, I thought I was really intelligent when I was 18? And an 18-year-old's Red Rising would be atrocious, because it would basically be me just talking like this the entire time. But my editor says, okay, so about 7 things you said were interesting, we're gonna put them on page. And it's a uniquely humbling experience, but it teaches you to be better and more truncated, and more, not truncated, but I'd say, it comes down to brevity and clarity. I don't believe in outlining for characters. For me, I don't have large notes or compendiums of notes for characters. I have one note card for each one, and it's usually a sticky note, so it's tiny, because I think if I haven't sketched out where their character is going to go, the arc they're going to have within that short amount of time, then I haven't made up my decision. Or I haven't made up my mind, I haven't made a decision based, and I haven't chosen where I want to go. And so, when I'm having the socio-political commentary in the story, it can't ever overwhelm the story, because then you have a boring book. And then you guys wouldn't be here, and we'd have like 5 people in the front row just being like, I have a question. And there'd be people I wouldn't want to talk to, as opposed to you lovely folks. And so, the desire a lot of times is to tell people what to think. But that's not my job. My job is to have a story that makes people think, and then let them choose themselves. So, that's how you eliminate a lot of this socio-political filler. And you let the characters' decisions, their emotions, you let them encounter the questions I want the reader to have about morality, about race, about a lot of things.
So back to the curse words. Last one before I open it out to you guys. Where did they come from? And do you have a favourite one that you didn't put in the book?
No, they let me put everything in. No. Well, it's really funny. My mom is always, when I was younger, my mom would say that if you don't, the curse words, if you curse a lot, you basically are proving that you are dumb because you have a small vocabulary. So I created compound curse words. And I was like, what the bloody fuck damn, Mom? And then my dad would just swat me, and I'd be like, ah! But the thing is, overall, I learned that, it all comes back down to that. I would always curse in strange ways when I was growing up. And I had a friend who was exactly like Severo growing up. And he would do the same thing, because whatever I did, he did. But to a crazy extent. If it's a cold day and like a pond, I would like put my foot in, and he would just like break a hole in the ice and dive under. He's crazy. And so he started doing this kind of thing. And now it's funny because I still get like gifts and emails from him, and all of a sudden the normal human response of 5 questions, correspondence, and he'll send me 20 pages of what's going on with his daughters and his family, and he's like, his one daughter, you remember her, the one with the gap tooth, you remember her test she had, she did so well on it, but we're a little bit disappointed because she missed 3 questions. But that's not that big of a deal, because she's actually an exceptional student overall, but she's a little bit insecure about her freckles, and I was like, what just happened? And I'm just like, you have 3 daughters? What's the way back here? So as well.
So when you were pitching it to studios, you had that. But I was wondering about when you were pitching the book to publishers. How long was the process? How was it?
How long do you think it is, out of curiosity?
Years.
Years, yeah. So I wrote 6 books prior to Red Rising. I wrote 2 a year from 18 on. I wrote Red Rising above my parents' garage when I was just about to start. I was just out of school or college, university, and yeah, I'm translating. I speak 2 languages, one of them fluently. And the process overall is very strange for a book because you write a book, then you expect this, massive congratulations from everyone you know, and there's just crickets. Even from your best friends, they're like, "Oh, cool." You're like, "I just died on the page," And that's the strange thing about writing is, right, you're trying to find catharsis because you're writing, and then you're never going to get the catharsis from individuals. You're never going to get it from sharing with people. So it's a very strange process overall. And I mean, my first 6 books, no agent wanted to represent me, no publisher wanted to take them. I was rejected 130 times in varying degrees of kindness. Some of these letters are just boldly mean. And some are just like so nice, they kill you with kindness. They basically say that you're a wonderful person. It's like being broken up with by someone you've never met. And I think 130 rejections is overall what I faced before I wrote Red Rising. And I wrote Red Rising and I was rejected by 25 agents. 5 agents were interested. I eventually chose 1 because all the other ones were so slow to get back to me. And I know, right? It ended up being an agent. It was her first book that she chose to represent. And so I look at her catalog to see if she has good taste, and she just chooses mine. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. She's either crazy or perfect. And it's kind of a combination of both now. But the thing is, it's wonderful because she's my age too, so I knew she would have time for me. And so I wrote it in, I think, 2011 in the summer. And then in the fall, I found out she wanted to represent me. And then we worked on it for about 3 months, in terms of editing it, etc. And then we sent it out, and three publishers were very interested. 2 wanted to change it drastically. 1 wanted to eliminate all the curse words. They basically said, "We want to wash Severa's mouth out with soap." And I said, "I bloody fucking damn dared." That was my response to it, and I walked away. I'm like, "Oh my God, they were gonna pay me though." So I thought I was such a badass, and then I was like, "I'm still eating cheeseburgers for that's all I can afford." And so then I think it was then the other publishing house wanted me to start in the Institute and eradicate the first 120 pages of the book and then do it in flashbacks. And I thought that was too jarring. Yeah, I thought you wouldn't have a foundation for the story and you wouldn't care. And so I went with Del Rey, who said they were really kind. They walked in and say, "We want to change some stuff." I'm like, "Okay, what do you want to change?" I say, "Well, there's probably overall not that big a change. It's 162 words throughout the entire document. At 130,000 words, I wanted to change 162. And none of them were curse words. So I'm like, "I'm down." So I went with them, and then the funny thing is, the process for that was a lot longer, and because they wanted to roll it out further on. So it took 2 years then to get published from then. And so it's a very, very long process, and that's when it works. A lot of times, with Patrick Rothfuss, it took him 9 years to write Name of the Wind. And it took him 3 years or 2 years, I think, to get it published. And so it all depends on your publisher, if they want to rush it out, if they want to do a hardback release every year, or if they want to do a paperback release of 3 books in 1 year. But overall, the query process itself is what takes the longest time, because you're waiting for agents who are overworked and overstressed to find your stuff amongst the slush.
Was this the right book to get that published in, or?
Yeah, I think so. Mostly because before I was writing tactically, I was writing for what I thought people wanted to read as opposed to the things I liked. And I think that's always the temptation, because you don't want to sink tons of time into a project that's not going to go anywhere. But that's not what writing is. Writing is you jumping, right? And then hoping people catch you. And they're not going to catch you for several years sometimes. And so it's a very scary process. But before, I was taking baby steps and assuming that I was going to get rewards because of that. And I think overall, those books are, kernels of them can be found in Red Rising. Kernels can be found, but I have no wish to go back in time and revisit them, mostly because the catharsis has done it. I've already exercised all the demons I was exercising in those books, and they're not particularly interesting demons.
Next. Oh, hang on. It's all right. You've got it now.
It's like passing the conch or conch in Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
I've got a question about the Obsidians. So, I mean, they're depicted mostly as bodyguards. I mean, what kind of role did they play in society before they rose up? And was there a trigger for them rising up?
So they were used primarily by Golds to conquer Earth, and they were used as a sledgehammer. And then they realized they made too many of them, and then they culled them. And then they had a dark revolt because they were being culled. The problem a lot of times with the war is putting away the instruments once they've been made. I think we can see that with nuclear bombs. So imagine the Obsidians were a nuclear bomb, or they were like Marxism. When the Allies, everyone except, looked at Russia at the end of the World War II and saw another conflict on the horizon. That's what the Golds saw after they conquered Earth. And so the Obsidians were bred only for combat. And then they realized they wanted to keep them around a little bit, but they wanted to vastly diminish their numbers. I mean, you don't have 8 foot tall, housekeepers. I wouldn't. Actually be awesome. I'm just thinking about it. I want to cross that river. I'll stand on your shoulders.
Questions about the movie adaptation. I mean, the phrase like young adult gets thrown around a bit a lot, but there's like the Hunger Games style killing each other, and then there's kind of like the Red Rising style, kind of more on the lines of like Deadpool style killing each other. So are they going to cut that down to make it young adult?
Yeah, I'm very glad you mentioned Deadpool, because I got some very interesting messages after Deadpool grossed $135 million in its opening weekend, saying, what do you think about the R-rated Red Rising? And I giggled like a little kid. I had too much candy. And I was like, yes, let's kill everyone in bloody ways.
Do you think they will let you, or do you think they'll try and do...
Oh, it's not about them letting me. It's about them trying to make something... Because, okay, so a lot of there's 2 warring things in Hollywood. Everyone wants to make something awesome. 3 warring things. Everyone wants to make something awesome. Very few people are capable of making something awesome. That was the one I just added. And then the third one is money. And so many of the studios are now owned by outside corporations that they have to have a bottom line. But the cool thing about the Deadpool thing is that it opens up the door. So it could be, yeah, fingers crossed, yeah. And so I personally would like to see that, but I think that what matters more is the tone than the violence. And you can have a great PG-13 tone, but I think that YA sometimes they water it down because they want 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds to be accessible and for them to like it. Whereas instead, I think that parents should be telling their 9 and 10-year-olds, I can't wait till you can go see Red Rising.
First, is Mustang based off of someone that you know in real life? And if so, can I have her number? And,
First off, no, you cannot have my mom's number. Dark question, man. We don't even know each other. So actually, seriously, she's based off my mom. Which is super awkward now.
So what's your next one, quickly?
You're talking about a film adaptation. One of the best adaptations has been the Game of Thrones adaptation, and it's been done on HBO. Why not go that route?
Money. Not money for me, but money for the show. HBO did not have a budget. Left any room in their budget for anything other than Game of Thrones. Look at the other programming they did, and they were doing. They were shrinking down everything's physical budget to make way for that show. Other networks like that don't have that budget. The only other one is Netflix, and they weren't buying yet at that time in the same way. And even House of Cards is a shoestring budget compared to Game of Thrones. 2 episodes of Game of Thrones cost as much as the entire House of Cards season. So it was straight up, I did not think that any network could do it, except for HBO. Now, if HBO had wanted to do it and said they would do it after Game of Thrones, that's another thing entirely. But the problem is, I'm not going to compete against one of my favorite properties that's already in its 4th season, when they're dedicating, I'd say, 70% of their development money to that show. Because I don't want to see this on Sci-Fi Channel. I think the Sci-Fi Channel can do some wonderful things. I love Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica, look at the sets though. They created a world they could show repeatedly on TV with human interaction, which never felt cheesy because the sets and the overall framework of it dictated closed environments, dark, easy shots, cheap episodes that cost $2 million to $1 million to make, not $8 million, $9 million, $10 million episodes, which is what I think I want in a Red Rising adaptation. Not simply for the grand spectacle of it, but to create the world that I created. Otherwise it's just going to be one and done. One season, it just doesn't work. And so it's just me trying to guard the property. And I thought that Mark Forster was the best person in the best position to
About
do it.
your upcoming books that you're working on?
Yeah, without spoilers, it's funny because most of the tour my answer was no, and you'll find out soon. And then I was told by Random House you can tell people, and now I'm weirded out that people know and I forget that they know. So people are like, tell me about Iron Gold, and I'm like, what? So Iron Gold is going to be the trilogy set in the Red Rising world after the events of Morning Star. It's going to take place 10 years afterwards, and will show a familiar cast of characters. I'm not going to say who survives and who dies, but a familiar cast of characters dealing with the repercussions of breaking an empire. And like I said, after a war, the hardest thing is putting away the tools of war. And then realizing, also, once you choose a violent alternative to solve a problem, it is very difficult to choose anything but violence to solve the problems that follow it. And I think that we can see that in our own world, and that's what I want to explore with Red Rising. But with Iron Gold. So it's going to be a trilogy that has multiple perspectives in it instead of just one. So it's not going to be just told through Darrow's POV. And I want to do that because I want to explore the world more and bring in characters we know and love and have them clash against one another or work with them and see the world through their eyes.